first thing we're going to do before we get started is preheat our oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, you can go one of two ways with starting your chicken drumsticks. We could either roast them or we could throw them right in the stock pot. They'll cook out fine that way. If you roast them, you'll have a different flavor profile with the end of your soup. That's why you'll see cans of soup named roasted chicken versus just chicken soup. The roasted chicken flavor is a deeper, richer flavor, and that's what I wanted to go for today. If you want to go the roasted route, make sure that you pat dry your chicken before we come over to season it. By patting it dry, we'll get to render some of that extra fat out, and you'll see later in this video what we're going to use the fat for. If you decide to just boil your chicken, you will get a higher concentration of fat in your stock, which you can skim off if you'd like. You could even chill the stock and then let it harden and then scrape the fat off that way if you want to get rid of it, or you can save it to use for other things. One of my favorite things to do with chicken fat is to saute onions. When it comes to chicken soup, you're basically playing a choose your own adventure. My favorite way to think about it is, all right, I've got this chicken and I know what else I have in my fridge. So I know I've got my celery, my carrots, my onions, and I know what I've got in my spice cabinet. I have plenty of the usual suspects on my screen here, from garlic, onion, an Italian mix. I have tarragon, I have sage, I have rosemary, Badia complete seasoning. I also have other things that I didn't pull out, like I have lemons and I have chili and I have paprika and I have a whole bunch of different things. So my decision today was I wanted to taste kind of like my grandma's roasted chicken soup. And my grandma always put parsley in her soup. So that's going to be the ingredient for this. I use the stems in the stock and then I put some of the delicate leaves in at the end of cooking. And what we get is this rich, homemade dark meat chicken noodle soup that really reminds me of being at my grandma's house, where she would slide one of her classic soup dishes in front of me. And I'd probably eat 2 bowls and she would never be mad about it. But this is the point before you start seasoning your chicken. This is really where you want to decide your direction. Do you want a creamy lemon chicken soup? Do you want a hearty vegetable soup, spicy soup, a simple salt, pepper, roasted chicken with basic vegetable soup? Whatever it is you choose, this is the moment to kind of set your framework. Look at your spice cabinet, look at your fridge, and just know that you're going to be eating something so delicious and comforting later. So for this, I just quickly seasoned with garlic and onion powder. I used the dried powders here because I don't want the raw wet vegetables going into the oven and adding liquid to the chicken itself. Plus, most of them would probably fall off onto the drip pan. I used an Italian seasoning mix, but I added some extra sage because sage is the last ingredient on the Italian mix. So I felt like there probably wasn't enough, and I love the way that sage goes with chicken so much. I also like to use coarse salt. I feel like it's easier for me to see how much is on the chicken. And then, of course, I use some coarse cut black pepper. A lot of this stuff is going to drip down with the fat drippings, and it's going to end up in the chicken fat that we use to saute our vegetables later. And then, as a personal preference, I like to spray on olive oil, and I keep it in this spray bottle. It's great. My mom actually got them for me as a gift, and they're just so convenient to have. And the oil is just a nice way to help evenly coat the chicken and get that browning going on the skin without overpowering or being too high of a concentration in the final pan drippings. And then you'll want to either take a sheet pan or a roasting pan, and if you have a rack, add a rack in. It'll make it easier to get the drippings out, but if not, no big deal. And then just lay the drumsticks out in a single layer. And then if you see any spots that are too naked, like the seasoning got rubbed off while it was in the bowl, just go ahead and take your complete seasoning and get some extra seasoning on there. Really easy. You don't need to break out all of your seasonings again if you have one of these complete mixes. And then when we're ready, we're going to get this in our preheated oven. I like to check the chicken halfway through. Plus, I'm also going to be making croutons that I want to get in there and reduce the temperature down to 350 at some point. So I'm going to set a timer for 25 minutes for about that halfway mark. And then next up is our vegetables. I like to start with the onions because the peels can be really annoying. If I was going to be chopping fresh garlic, I would also do the garlic at this time to get the peels out of the way. I'm using some sweet Vidalia onions that I have that are a bit older. They're still good. There's nothing wrong with them. They're still firm to the touch, but they're not quite as firm and crisp as the new pack of onions I got that I'm going to use in the final pot of soup. And one thing I want to note about the onions is when you're making stock, you don't actually have to peel your onions. You're going to want to make sure they soak in water and you wash them really well and cut those little extra bits off both ends to get rid of any roots that might be holding onto dirt. But between roasting and the pigment that comes out of either sweet and yellow onion skins when you're cooking, the end product that you're going to get is a super rich, dark, golden broth. So if you're boiling your chicken for this recipe, but you want it to look rich and golden, throw a whole unpeeled onion in your stock. It's going to be incredible. But making stock is a great way to use up all the vegetables. I'm going to do the same thing. I have a brand new pack of celery that's got a ton of leafy bits and also those inner stalks that are always soft no matter how fresh they are. You can make use of all of those scraps. And what's more frugal than that, right? We're making this dish because chicken drumsticks were super, super cheap. It was a great deal this week. And we're also going to be using up a ton of the things that we had sitting in the fridge. So rather than throw them away, this is a great way to make use of things. So once we've got our vegetables for the stock ready, we get them in the big stock pot, and I love to just get them in my double-sided sink, fill it up. You can use a mixture with vinegar to help clean your vegetables. Water works well too. We can just soak them in our big stock pot, rinse it a few times, clean it real good, and then get it right on the stove. After I do that, I like to prepare the super fresh, super crunchy vegetables, chop them up now. That way, when I'm ready to, I just have to pull them out of the fridge and throw them right into the pot that I'm going to use to make my final pot of delicious chicken soup. And I love the way the final vegetables look. It's just so vibrant. But we'll get those in the fridge. Now, this step only matters if you have some bread that you want to use to make some croutons. I saw this bread at the store, and I knew I was going to make soup this week, and I knew that I was going to need sandwiches. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to buy it. It's only $1.99. We're going to be frugal. If you have old bread you want to use up, or you just want to try to bring your soup to the next level, so you're going to buy bread just for this cause, I fully support either endeavor. And using a bread knife, you're going to cut it up into these squares. They're going to float on top of my soup like little garlicky, cheesy boats. And yep, I had to try a piece. It is fluffy, fresh bread. I have no idea why this is discounted. And I'm using a giant mixing bowl because it'll be easy to toss around. So use the biggest bowl you've got, toss your sliced bread in there. I thought about making stuffing and probably would have done that if I was just doing roasted chicken that I was going to eat off the bone. So that's another really good idea to have, you know, in the back of your mind if you come across discount bread or you've got some old bread you want to use up. That next time you're making chicken, you could take some of the stock, some of the fat drippings, you could take some butter out of your fridge, get some sage and salt and whatever other mix-ins, and take your extra bread and make delicious stuffing. And then once I've got my bread all cut up, it's all loaded up in this nice bowl, I'm going to put together an olive oil butter mixture to make the croutons. You don't have to use both. You could use just oil, you could use just butter, and you can get away without using any oil at all, basically tostinis. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a third of olive oil. I used extra virgin for this. It'll be a nice strong flavor. And then I'm going to use a third cup of butter. I'm going to melt it first, and I'm going to pour it into my measuring cup here. And remember, sometime around this point, we want to turn down our oven temperature from 425 to 350. And you could use, this is another mini choose your own adventure. You could add in garlic powder, you can use Italian seasonings, you could use rosemary, you could use everything bagel seasoning. So this is another thing. Look at your spice cabinet, see what you've got. I do prefer to use dried spices and herbs for my croutons. That way, you know, I get maximum golden and crispy crunch for my croutons. But there are people that like to use fresh herbs chopped up and throw them in their homemade croutons. And then I use just shy of a teaspoon of sea salt and just shy of a teaspoon of garlic powder. And I'm going to pour this in 3 sets. So I'm going to have everything in my giant bowl here, and I'm going to take a wooden spoon and toss it around. And I'm only pouring about a third of my mixture in at a time. That way it doesn't all get absorbed by one sneaky, greedy cube of bread. We can get it mixed up really nice. And you'd be surprised, it looks like it's being stubborn about mixing, but, you know, we're going to do this again. We're going to do this a second time. We're going to give it another mix with the spoon. And then we're going to give it a mix a third time. And somehow, just like that, it gets coated all around. And this is a great time if you want some delicious olive oil bread, or you just want to try what your final crouton might taste like when it's done crisping. Free to take a sample. Pretend this is your own sample aisle. I mean, if you think it's missing anything, you can always sprinkle additional seasoning, but when I tried it, it was so good. I wanted to eat them just like this. And then you're going to notice that I'm using 2 trays here. This is because you don't want to overcrowd your croutons, and I have the room in the oven to do this. I've always found that my croutons come out better when I use parchment paper. It's just magic or something. So I get them spread out there in a single layer with my 2 pans. I can fit both of my pans in the oven right now, but if you can't, just cook them in batches. Or plan B, you just keep snacking on the extra bread pieces and, you know. And for one of these trays, which happens to be my smaller tray, I'm going to sprinkle with the fridge granulated Parmesan cheese. It ends up baking really well without being like weird melty gooey, we don't end up turning out with a Texas cheese toast clump. So I know some people don't love their fridge Parmesan cheese, but I do, and I definitely love them on Parmesan croutons. I love to put the croutons in the final 15 minutes or so of the chicken cooking. That way everything can come out of the oven at one time and I can turn the oven off. But if that's not the case, do what you gotta do. Set the timers as you need to, pull things out when they need to come out. Now, when you take the croutons out, be sure to sample one. Gotta make sure they're good before you serve them to anyone else. We're going to take our pot of washed vegetables and we're gonna get the roasted chicken. You can either shred the chicken off the bone after you take it out of the oven, or you can let it simmer for 25 to 30 minutes in the stock pot. I prefer to let it simmer in the stock pot because it lets more of the flavor go into the stock, and it also makes it easier to separate the meat from the nice crispy roasted skin. If you want to go low calorie, it's a good idea to pull the skins off before throwing them into the stock pot. I like to add it all in and get everything I can out of this chicken in my little pot. As soon as you get everything in your pot ready to go, you're going to fill the pot with water, make sure everything's covered, get it on your stove, throw in anything additional you'd like. I do add 2 bay leaves. This is a pretty big pot of soup, so I'm using 2. If it's a smaller stock that you're making, you can totally get away with 1 bay leaf, or you can use no bay leaf at all. And then what I like to do is I like to get my stock up to a boil and then turn it down lower so it simmers, since I want to be able to pull the meat off the bone before it loses too much flavor into the broth. I like to make sure I check after about 25 minutes if it's easy to pull off the bone. And then I like to throw the bones back in. After I've taken the meat out, I'm going to put the meat in a glass container and put it in the fridge for later on until I'm ready to make my final soup. If you have a colander and you have an additional pot, I like to use the pot that I'm going to use for my final pot of soup. I'll put it next to my sink. I'll put a colander in it, and then from my stock pot, I'll scoop big scoops of whatever I can fish out of there. It's a great way to catch any of the extra broth that's still kind of coming out of the scoop with you. Dump it right back in your stock pot and take a cheesecloth or a fine mesh strainer and get any of the smaller bits out, and then be left with a pot of smooth liquid stock. Give it a taste test. If it feels like you need to add chicken bouillon, you could do that, or you could just reduce it down. So let some of that water evaporate, cook it out for a while. So we've got the same pot making its appearance again that we just used to drain that liquid, and this time I've got my pre-chopped vegetables ready to go. My goal is not to brown the onions. All I did was heat up some chicken drippings in the pot, and then I added my pre-chopped vegetables that we chopped earlier, my carrots, my celery, and my onions all together. And I've got this on a medium heat. You don't want to cook it too high. To have a gentle and sweeter flavor with the onions, you don't want to make this too high. You don't want this stuff to start browning. And once those bright colors fade ever so slightly, this is going to be a great time to start adding in your stock. I like to use a glass Pyrex measuring cup, and I just put it right in my stock pot. If that's not comfortable, use a ladle. And look at that. You can see the dark, rich color. That's not just from the roasted chicken. That is from the onion peel. Even though we really only had one that went in with the onion peel on it. It's a beautiful, beautiful color. That is such a rich stock. And I have a ton of it. I'm going to be able to fill this whole pot, all from like a $4 pack of drumsticks and vegetables that I had. I like my vegetables to have a little bit of a crunch sometimes. Sometimes I kind of like them soggy. Totally your preference. But whatever it is that you want to do, make a mental note. And if you want to add rice, if you want to add noodles, you're going to want to know about how much time that will need to cook properly without being overcooked. If you have extra stock or you just want to use water, you can also cook those things separately. If you already have leftover rice or noodles in your fridge, you can throw those in, get them used. So what I did is I cooked my vegetables for about 20 minutes. You could see that they're still bright, but I was able to, with the spoon, with a little bit of force, mush a carrot apart. So that's kind of like a good indicator, right? It's a good time. That's my signal that it's time to put my noodles in. I am using egg noodles. I love egg noodles in chicken soup. They look really cool because they're spirally and they have a great texture. Now this is a good time to add some salt while the noodles are cooking to help them absorb the salt. And remember that while you're cooking the noodles, either you should cover your pan if you don't want water to evaporate, or you should understand that some water might evaporate while cooking, and you'll want to double check your broth after the noodles are cooked to make sure it's still salty enough, or if it's too salty, you'll want to add a little bit more water or stock from your pot to level it out. Because my chicken was sitting in the fridge and is nice and cold, I'm also gonna add that in at the same time, and then we're gonna come back in about 8, 9 minutes, check on our noodles. If it needs a little bit longer, let it go a minute or 2 more, but don't let it go too much. You don't want soggy noodles. And you can either relax for the next 8 or so minutes, or if you're like me and want to prepare your mix-ins, this is a great time to set up the croutons, for example, that we had earlier. You can use croutons that you had in the pantry. I had green onion in my fridge, so I'm gonna chop up some green onions. I also like to experiment with putting different types of cheeses in my chicken soup. So I'm going to pull out some shredded cheese, sharp cheddar, and Gouda and Gruyere. You could slice up some jalapeno, whatever toppings you want. This 8 minutes is a valuable 8 minutes if you want to set up a little topping bar for your soups. Get your bowls ready, because as soon as this is done, you're going to be more than ready to eat. And look at that. We have such a beautiful soup. This is ready to be eaten, and it's going to be so good. And then just look how beautiful that looks. Look how gold that is. I can't imagine not loving soup, but it's not everyone else's favorite meal. So just these 3 simple topping mix-ins are a game changer for that. They look really cute. They're just an extra layer of fun. And then everyone can eat their hot, delicious soup however they like it. And I'm not gonna lie, I ended up having 2 bowls. So we're making our first round of bowls here. And for mine, I had chosen to just do a mix of all 3 toppings. And oh my gosh, it was so good. The sharpness of the cheese really added an extra layer of flavor. And the croutons were so amazing in this soup. I got the same feedback from the whole household. For my second bowl, I didn't use any mix-ins and I just added a little bit more salt and pepper. I didn't need to do that for the first bowl, but just a sprinkle of salt on pepper and, got to have my traditional bowl of chicken soup. Because my grandma never added cheese or croutons to her soup. And oh my god, that second bowl was so good. It was so different, but it was so good. And all of this from a pack of chicken drumsticks that was on sale. It was $4 and some change, and ingredients that I would have anyway. So yes, I did buy this bread because it was on sale, but if not, I would have bought generic cheap bread in any case. I think that was a great buy. We've also made several sandwiches and still have some slices left currently. There's like 2 croutons left, one of each flavor that I think no one wants to be the ones to take the last bite. The croutons didn't last that long. We kind of went through those like crazy, but they were so, so good. There are so many ways we could have made this soup a little differently, and there's really no way you can go wrong except not making enough. So there you have it. I hope you enjoy this video. I hope if you do end up trying croutons in soup and you've never tried it before, that you end up loving them. I think it's such a killer combo. I'd love to hear your ideas for your own soup mix-ins or variations on chicken soup flavors in the comments. And I hope that you subscribe so that way you can come back and cook with us next time. I'll always do my best to help inspire new ways to use ingredients you have on hand, new ways to make cooking simpler, new ways to not have to rely on a step-by-step instruction manual just to make a delicious home-cooked meal. And most importantly, I want to help you come up with delicious food that's good to eat, that's good for you, and also good on your pockets. So I hope you can like and subscribe this video and that you'll join us again for the next time we're cooking. Take care.